Hello everyone, Flipper is here from Holistic Songwriting. Welcome to the live Q&A. Let's jump right into the intro. Live! Alright. How's it going, my beautiful ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to this week's session. This is live Q&A number 37. 37. That's pretty crazy. That means 1.5 days of doing these kind of things. Pretty intense, if you ask me. So, how's it going, you guys? I'm good. I just had a very heavy playtesting session of the game, which went really well. But man, got some good feedback for it. So that's been tough, man. Getting good feedback is the worst, because if you know that they're right, that's the toughest. So, hey, man, how's it going, Martin? Yeah, so that's been going on. I've been working on my studio a little bit more. Got some new Avantone reference speakers. So that's something I've recently acquired for my studio. So reference speakers are essentially a second pair of speakers that sound like shit, and that's the point of them. So they don't have many highs, they don't have many lows. They're supposed to sound like shitty stereo speakers, like boombox or something like that, so that you can hear what your mix will sound like on a boombox or on a cell phone or whatever it is the kids listen to music on these days. You know, that's kind of the whole point of it all. How's it going, Itachi? So yeah, so that's kind of something I've been getting. And last week I didn't show you guys this, but I got this beauty right here. It's not the prettiest guitar, but man, it sounds great. I've always wanted a guitar like this because this is no ordinary guitar. This is no ordinary guitar. It is a baritone. So what that means is the neck is a little bit longer. It's got a couple more frets. And most importantly, it goes a little bit lower. So this is, I think, it's a fourth lower than a regular guitar. So it's kind of in between a guitar and a bass. And the nice thing about it is, you know, instead of getting you could get this instead of a 7th string guitar. I want this for like deep, low, chuggy rhythm guitar for metal and rock kind of music. It's compared to a 6 or 7 string, or sorry, 7 or 8 string. This has a much clearer tone. You know how when you play a 6 string, or sorry, a 7 string, like really low, you get a lot of just noise like that added to your original signal, and it becomes really hard to kind of tell where the note is. Sometimes it just gets really muddy. These here are really clear because they're still 6 strings and they're designed that way. They're designed to go that low, whereas on a 7 string, it's essentially just a 6 string guitar that's got a little bit thicker neck, so you can add a 7th string on top of it. So it's not designed for those really low notes, whereas this is. All right. I go to my car if I need such shit speakers, says Martin. Yeah, a lot of people do that. It's just more handy if you have them in your studio. A lot of music producers actually just mix on shitty speakers, and they just quickly check with their professional monitors to see if the mix is fine. But usually they mix on like really bad speakers. So when I was in Berlin, for example, looking at a couple of studios there, a lot of the mixers there, they really just mix on boom boxes and like really tiny, small, shitty speakers. And every once in a while, they would just go to their main speakers and listen to the mix on there. But just as a reference, kind of like, oh, are the highs okay, are the lows okay? But pretty much everything else, they just mixed on really bad speakers. So that was like when I realized, like, damn, I really should think about that a little bit more, because people don't listen to your mixes on, you know, professional stereo systems. They listen to it on their cell phones or in their car or whatever, you know. Itachi is part German. That's interesting. Itachi isn't a very German name, is it? Itachi Schmidt. Ear training, says R13. Is that a question, or did you just want to voice your thoughts? Have you heard of Joy, says Itachi. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. What's Joy? Let me just Google that real quick. All right. I mean, I could find the movie with Jennifer Lawrence, but a band, I'm guessing. It's an Austrian dance pop band. Is that what you're talking about? That was founded in 1984. It's probably not who you mean, is it? But they made 7 albums, and one of them is called Mallorca Summer Dance Party. That sounds perfect. I'm sure that's the band you're talking about, isn't it? All right, so R13 says question, or I guess Q. Does that mean question? Do you have a question, R13, or are you just writing random things? Not to be mean here or anything, but if you want to ask a question, just please type the whole question. All right. Hi, everyone. How's it going, Falfish? Hello, Moreno. All right. So I think we're at that point now where it is legal to ask a question so that I can do my best to answer it. No judgment of yesterday. Yesterday. Is this a football thing or something? Did something happen politically that I'm not aware of yesterday? All right. Ashraf says, thanks a lot for all your previous videos, especially the ones analyzing Ed Sheeran's and Muse's songwriting. Cool. Thanks, man. Glad you liked them. Those were definitely a lot of fun to do. And Ed Sheeran was really the one that was the big one for this channel. Like, that was the one that changed holistic songwriting from small-time little company into like something that I can make a living off. So yeah, Ed Sheeran's been really good to me in that way, and I'm really grateful for that episode and everything that's happened because of that. All right, Moreno says, I hear some artists spend months on a mix. For beginner mixes, would you recommend just practicing? That's a good one. I would say no. I would say go for the real thing right away, because if you feel like, oh, I've got something great here, I have to turn this into something that sounds great, you just put more effort into it and you really try. If you're just saying like, this is not worth anything really, so let's just mix around a little bit, you're never going to get anywhere anyways. I found one of the things I found when I started studying is before I started my studies at Artes in Enschede, I thought like, oh, we're going to learn how to produce songs. We're going to learn how to mix songs. There's going to be someone who says like, here's what you start with. Do this first, then do that, then do that, then do that, and here's the technicalities behind it. And that's just not what happened. What I realized was, if you want your mixes to sound better, the number one trick is to just try harder. Just instead of saying, it's so easy. Like before I started studying, I thought it's so easy to say something like, it doesn't sound the way I want it. I just can't do this. I guess I'm no good. Someone else would do a better job, but I clearly can't. It's so easy to say that, when in reality, once I started studying, I realized there is no secret sauce, really. It really comes down to experience and just doing it over and over again. And the one thing, the mind shift that I had really was to say, you know what, I should spend more time on this. If I want this to sound good, it just means I have to throw a lot of hours at it. That's really the only way to get better. And it's really helped. That's the best approach, as far as I can tell, to get better at anything really, but especially in production. If something doesn't sound right, and it doesn't sound right, then just keep working on it. And it's a lot of just trial and error. That's just how it is. Sound is very difficult because there's no clear rules. It's sometimes you just have to try out a lot of stuff and see what sticks, All right. What's your favorite music video, says Anderson IV. That's a really cool question. I really, really love Deftones' Sex Tape. I think Deftones made a few really, really beautiful music videos, but Sex Tape I think is just so beautiful, like all the colors and man, I really love that video a lot. There's a couple that have just great energy, like Hexagram by the same band. Other bands, I really like Alt J's video for Breeze Blocks. I think is a great music video. The OK Go videos obviously are amazing. My favorite one probably being This Too Shall Pass, especially if you watch the TED Talk behind it. It's so fun and super creative. What else is there? Oh man, there's so many great music videos. There's the My Moon, My Man by Feist is a great video as well. Super simple, but just, I don't know, just unique. I really like that video. Thinking here. Yeah, I think those are probably my favorites. I would say, man, I'm just gonna think of so many more music videos in the next couple days. Beirut, I don't know how to pronounce it in English actually, by Ibrahim Malouf is another amazing music video that's super simple. I think anyone could have made that video. It's basically just a really cheap camcorder where someone increased the shutter speed. But it just looks so amazing. It fits the music so well. That's just an amazing video. Beirut is spelled Beirut by Ibrahim Malouf, Malouf. So that is a really, really cool video. Again, super simple. Like anyone could have made that with their cell phone, essentially. Well, not the cell phone. I think shutter speed. I'm not sure if a lot of cell phones can handle shutter speed, or like where you can, so you can set it manually. All right, but that's, man, there's so many more. I'm trying to think of more because there's so many great videos. I'll think of some, I'm sure, in the future. All right. He's a singer. Search on SoundCloud, says Itachi. Schmidt, is that his name? I don't know him. German singer. All right. R13 says, how to train ear quickly. Well, I have an entire course about that called the 30-Day Ear Training Challenge, which, you know what, I'm going to post it here in the chat so you can find it more easily. Ear Training Challenge 30-Day. So here we go. I'm just going to send you a link. And this is my way of teaching ear training. This is how I learned it, and it really improved my ear training by quite a bit. And I think being able to analyze stuff is so important. So yeah, it's definitely something to check out, man. If you're interested in training your ears, getting better at analyzing and transcribing stuff, that's definitely something to check out. Mtila says, I have an interesting question. Great. Which I kept in mind for today. How to credit contributors. Who's the producer, co-producer, additional producer, etc. I found no good sources online. You have a link for me? I don't have a link because everyone just kind of does it willy-nilly. So it's really different with bigger artists and smaller artists. With bigger artists, oftentimes they have so much power that they can just write themselves into the credits. So if you see, for example, Justin Bieber in the credits of a song, that doesn't necessarily mean that he co-wrote the song. It just means that he was involved in the project, which is obvious. Sometimes they have just struck good deals with their labels so that they get a little bit of royalties every time that song is played. So that doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. I'm sure he did a little bit of work on it, especially when it came to singing the song in the studio, and he realized, oh no, you know what? This little lick here would be nice or whatever, and that can already be considered as writing. So technically, it's not wrong to put that in to the credits. But, you know, there's obviously other people who probably put way more work into those songs than he did. And I'm not singling out Justin Bieber here. It's just an example in this case. So, you know, crediting is kind of, the lines are really blurry. Whereas other artists like Taylor Swift really write their own songs. And obviously they have a big pool of producers that pimp it up for them and turn it into something that is commercial and modern sounding. But she writes the chords and melodies and lyrics, you know, so that's pretty much all her. And she has co-writers for that as well, but she does a lot of the work herself. So it's kind of difficult to tell who writes what, how the crediting works. Oftentimes it just comes down to contracts. When it comes down to your own productions and to your own music, I would say it really depends on how you feel. If someone's asking for credit, you know, there's two types of credits. Are they asking just for credit in the album? They're just asking for a little nod to them, like, hey, he also wrote some lyrics, additional lyrics by, or something like that, or additional arrangement by. Fine. If it's just, you know, I would say, like, that's always fair, always good to, like, if someone did a little bit of work on the track, they should always get a little nod in the booklet or on the website for that. Sure. If it's about money, then I think they have to do a little bit more work. There have been stories, and that's also, the lines here are really blurry. That's the unfortunate bit. There have been situations where some producers came late to a track, played a shaker, and said, now I want 50% of the royalties, which is ridiculous. But because they were such a big producer, they got those 50% on royalties. It's ridiculous, but they said, like, this is the thing that now makes it stand out. That's the thing that's going to make it commercial. And, you know, maybe they're right, maybe they weren't. It turned out to be a big hit in this case. But, you know, maybe it was a big hit before that shaker thing. So it's kind of hard to say. I think if you co-wrote the song with someone, 50-50 splits are fair. That's the American way of doing things. Not really worrying about, like, who wrote the music or who wrote the lyrics or blah, blah, blah. Just if you wrote it together and you both felt like you both put your heart and soul into it. Like, if one of you clearly was just half asleep during the entire session and said, like, one or two things and the other person wrote the whole song, then I think you should renegotiate. But if both of you had your mind in the game, then I think a 50-50 split is always fair, and you don't have to fight over stuff. It just feels fair to both of you, you know? So everyone who contributes like equally, I think, should get an equal share in royalties. And then in terms of if you have someone who just did a small piece of work, then it depends on how much that work was. Sometimes, like for additional arrangement where someone like say I have a pop song, right, and I want an orchestral arrangement for that, and I couldn't do the orchestration myself. I hire someone to do the orchestration. There's two options. Either they do it for a fixed fee, and they do it one and over, and they get a little bit of credit on the album, but not in terms of royalties. Or they say, I'll take a little bit less money, but I want some royalties for that. So it really becomes a balancing act, and in both cases, I think that person should be mentioned in the credits, but whether they actually get royalties is a different question altogether. And then it really comes down to, in those kind of cases where it's hired work, really comes down to the contract that the two of you make. Or it doesn't actually have to be a contract, just the two of you. Like a verbal agreement is enough in this case. Okay, let's see. Ashraf says, how do I improve my songwriting? I mean the message that shall be delivered with the words chorus to make a song that's more authentic as Ed Sheeran and Stromae. A lot of authenticity also comes from the way you perform something. Like if Ed Sheeran, for example, seems authentic even though he's singing terribly cheesy lyrics, if you think about it. Like for the Ed Sheeran episode, I remember reading through his lyrics and thinking, wow, this is actually really cheesy, but you don't notice it when you listen to the songs. Oh, well, you kind of notice this a little bit, of course, but it's not as noticeable when you listen to the song and everything just fits together, kind of. And he seems like a genuine guy, and so when he sings I love you or whatever, or something along those lines, that feels fine. Whereas I know that if I went to an open mic night and someone sang that, I would probably cringe my teeth a little bit. So it really comes down to the performance as well. The performance is really crucial. If you as a person have a very natural charm, let's put it like that. If you have a certain charm that goes with those kind of messages, then that definitely helps. So working on yourself and on your performance and how you look when you sing, and smiling in the right places in your song or something like that, or when you shed a tear, you don't have to fake everything, obviously, but planning or understanding at least how that works, how your face works in that regard, can be a portion of the answer here. So the other part is how you write better lyrics in that sense that seem very honest. I think a really great way to do it is to be very specific with your lyrics. And I don't mean every line has to be super specific, but throwing in one or two things into your entire song lyric that are very specific, right? Where you talk about a certain brand, where you have a certain word that is very special to your song, right? Man, obviously I can't think of anything right now. Does anyone have a good example? But there's tons of songs where there's just where they throw in just one very specific word or one very specific thing. For example, let's see, Taylor Swift. How about New Year's? I'm sure, I know that one had great lyrics. So I'll read you the first couple of lines to New Year's Day by Taylor Swift, which I think is a really great song that does a lot of that, what you're talking about. The first line is, there's glitter on the floor after the party. So glitter, floor, party, super usual words in pop music, but glitter, interesting, Glitter is specific enough for this kind of thing to kind of catch your attention. Girls carrying their shoes down in the lobby, right? What does that remind us of? That means these girls have been dancing all night and now they're too tired to wear their high heels or whatever, right? That's a really specific kind of thought. And that's what makes this so real. It's more real than saying everyone's tired, everyone goes home, is really not as strong as saying girls carrying their shoes down in the lobby. Candle wax and Polaroids on the hardwood floor. You and me from the night before, but don't read the last page, but I stay when you're lost and I'm scared and you're turning away. I want your midnights, but I'll be cleaning up bottles with you on New Year's Day. So that whole chorus, don't read the last page, but I stay when you're lost and I'm scared and you're turning away. I want your midnights. All of that is fairly standard stuff. There's no weird words here, nothing that we're not haven't seen before. The last line, and that's the big line in the song, obviously. That's why the song's called New Year's Day. But I'll be cleaning up bottles with you on New Year's Day. That's unique. That's very specific. Bottles, New Year's Day is words that we don't hear a lot in pop songs. And so that's kind of what turns this from a very generic, standard kind of song into something that feels authentic and real. All right? You squeeze my hand 3 times in the back of the taxi. Not just once. She doesn't sing, you squeeze my hand, or you take my hand. Take my hand is like a super cliche. Squeeze my hand 3 times. Super specific. How could this be any more specific? In the back of the taxi, right? It's not just like in the taxi or something like that. It's in the back of the taxi. So it's getting more and more specific. I can tell it's going to be a long road. I'll be there if you're... Oh yeah, I'll be there if you're the toast of the town, babe. Or if you strike out and you're crawling home. So that's fairly... like in terms of specificity, it's not super specific, but the words she's using, toast, strikeout, crawling, are fairly unique. You know, the words in this case are specific enough. And then we have the chorus again. Hold on to the memories, they will hold on to you. That's fairly standard. It's like a little play on words, but that's fine. Nothing like in terms of the specificity. There's nothing super special here. Please don't ever become a stranger whose laugh I could recognize anywhere. Yeah, that's fairly standard, and then it's a repetition of the first verse pretty much. All right, cool. So just as an example, check out New Year's Day by Taylor Swift. That I think has some really interesting lyrics in that regard, and it does what you're talking about fairly well, I think. How do you approach composing in a mode similarly to functional harmony? It says Jaroslav Fedorchuk. Fedorchuk, I think, is how that's pronounced. How to approach composing in a mode similarly to functional harmony. What do you mean by... so how do you approach composing in a mode? I understand, but what do you mean similarly to functional harmony? Do you mean... so in your mind, there's 2 different ways of composing. One is using functional harmony, like 1-4-5, and then, I don't know, a couple of, using dominants, etc., and like, what's it called? Cadences. And then there's using modes to write. Is that what you're talking about? Or what do you mean similarly to functional harmony? Could you clarify, please, Jaroslav? Thanks. I just started learning the ukulele, and do you have any good tips, says Isaac. No, not really. I mean, I play a little bit of uku. Yeah, it's not too difficult. So just have fun while you're doing it, man. That's the most important thing, I think. And it's going to come to you rather quickly, I think. It's not a very difficult instrument to learn, especially the open chords are fairly quick to understand. What messed me up in the beginning was that the lowest strings, so the one that's the closest to you as a player, is actually the highest string of them all. That was something that really messed me up. But if this is your first instrument, that's something you're not going to notice. Itachi says, native to Germany singer named Joy. Can you search on SoundCloud? He sings in English. I don't know, man. I'm not sure if I want to do that, because if I play live music on this live Q&A, it has happened to me before that the whole thing got blacklisted and no one else was able to watch these live Q&As, which is kind of a shame. Because like it could be taken down if there's a rights issue, I don't want to play someone else's songs on this thing. It's a copyright issue. So, yeah. Yaroslav says, what are productional tips of making the main instrument stand out in the mix when you are attempting a maximalist aesthetic instrumentally, like Devin Townsend or Gustav Mahler? Oh, wow, some very different examples. I would say it's a lot of it really is in the arrangement. So if you want a melody to really stand out, what you need to do is write stuff for the other instruments that don't get in the way of that main instrument. So if you have, for example, an orchestral section, if you want... So for example, a scenario which is quite tricky to pull off is having a cello solo in a symphonic orchestra where you only have strings, right? Like you only strings, an entire string section, and you have someone playing a cello solo over that. Obviously, it's the same range. There's going to be, 8 cellos in the back behind him, but still that one cello has to really stand out. How do you do that? Obviously, first of all, through loudness. He's going to play a little bit louder than everyone else. but it's also the arrangement. It's what everyone else is playing. So in that case, for example, maybe the other cellos play something that's a lot higher up the neck so that they don't conflict so much with the other cello, which is playing like really low or playing the entire range of the instrument. In that case, you probably wouldn't have like the other strings like violins 1 and 2 or the violas playing something really low. You probably have them playing something very light and very high up the string, so that you get a sort of light, like fluttery kind of feel. And so then the cello can play like with full notes, and it's going to sound really full-bodied and big compared to all this really light background, you know. And you'd probably take out the double basses and maybe take out even the other cellos, just so that it sounds really, the background is really light and the cello can really stand out. So that's one way of doing it. If you have a big orchestral cue where there's a lot going on and maybe an action scene and you want one instrument to have take the lead, then you should probably just double that lead. So for example, say you have this huge action cue and you want a flute to play the lead. That's not going to work. You really need to double that flute up with a couple of other instruments if you want that to shine through. So, you know, pack up some trombones, some trumpets, first strings, you know, first violins, maybe second violins, double that up in octaves or something like that. Everyone should be playing that theme, otherwise it's really not going to come through enough if you were competing with a really strong brass section or a really loud percussion section or something like that even. So yeah, so that's one big part of it. And now looking at the production, really the mixing of it all, taking out some of the highs for the background music and having the main instrument be the only instrument that really has all those highs, will make the background fade more into the background, and that core instrument is going to stand out more, because highs is something we associate with instruments that are very close to us. You may notice this if you call someone who's really far away. If they're talking to you, it's really difficult to understand them because the high frequencies don't travel so well. Whereas if you're really close to someone, if someone's talking right into your ear, almost everything you're hearing is just the sibilance, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's why things that have a lot of highs seem closer than things that don't have those highs, the treble. All right, Yaroslav says, is EQ and reverb enough, or are there some interesting tricks? EQing is really a big thing. Reverb is another good point. Yes, reverb is another way to make something seem further away. Compression is another one. You can kind of shave off the transients of signals to make it sit further back in the mix, meaning like you're choosing a shorter attack, right? And probably even a shorter release as well. Because that's going to cut off the transients. And transients is another thing that often has a lot of highs, that often sits really close, which is why, for example, for vocals, we don't want a very short attack. We want an attack of maybe 30 milliseconds so that the transients can pop through, and it's going to make it sound as if it was closer. What's another thing that you could do? Those are pretty much the ones I use. Panning is obviously another big one, and volume, clearly, like if you're mixing, pulling down the fader for the background music and pulling up the fader for the main instrument is a clear example of what you could do. Panning the background more to the sides and having the main instrument sit in the center is a big one. There's stuff like using choruses on the background to make that wash out a little bit more, and the main instrument has none of that. It's like super, almost dry in terms of effects, or in terms of those effects that wash it out at least. Yeah, so that's another idea. Mtila says, Martin says, I asked because I see Rick Rubin very often in credits, but in the making of videos, he just lolls on the couch in the studio. Yeah, I think that's a good example of it. But I'm sure he does some more work than that, and I'm sure he has some really good input as well on sessions like that. He wouldn't be the legend that he is if he, wasn't able to do the work. Also, it could be that Rick is like someone who really is a secluded kind of mixer. Like he wants everyone to leave when he starts mixing. Who knows? Yeah, maybe that doesn't make for a very good making off video. You never know. It's hard to say. Sometimes you might be right. He just puts his name on it, and he was the guy who made some musical suggestions and said something like, Don't take these tracks. This is not good enough. That's what I heard he said to Adele on her new record, that he said, like, this is not good enough. Do something more like this. And that was his whole role as a producer, almost. Clearly he wasn't the producer for it, but he gave her some valuable advice. And I think he's in the credits as well. I might be wrong about that, though. Motor Mike says, do you think we'll ever get to the point where it's impossible to write original music? Well, yeah, kind of. There's always new ways to combine things that have already been there, though, but we already have rehashed a lot of melodies. Like, there's a lot of songs out there, especially pop songs, that just rehash pop melodies that we've heard of, before. The question is, do you recognize it? Can you remember all melodies in the world? Of course you can't. And so if someone is copying someone else, it's still a question of, like, are you going to notice that? Do you know the other piece? And do you notice that the two of them are really alike? With Ed Sheeran being sued for that Marvin Gaye song sounding too much like, what was that song by Let's Get It On by Marvin Gaye versus Ed Sheeran's, that super huge ballad that was like, everyone was listening to that for a really long time. Super big hit. Jesus, why can't I remember it? Because, darling, we are love right where we are. You know the song. Anyways, like, there's a big discussion going on. There's a big trial right now between Marvin Gaye's family and Ed Sheeran, and apparently Ed Sheeran stole it from Marvin Gaye, which is completely ridiculous, obviously, but they might win still. It's super difficult to say. The production is super different. The chords are different. Everything is kind of different. The feel in general is the same. And you might say, like, oh yeah, they're never going to win. But there have been cases like the Blurred Lines case, for example, which was also Marvin Gaye against, was it? It was Marvin Gaye, right? I think so. Against the people from Blurred Lines, like Robin Thicke and those guys. And they won because they argued that it felt the same. It had the same kind of feel to it, which is completely ridiculous, but they won, and now it's a precedent's case. So you never know how that's going to turn out. It's something, honestly, not to worry about too much. Just write the music that you know, that you love. Make music that you feel excited about. If it sounds too much like something that you've already heard and you realize, oh wow, this is like the exact same thing. I actually wrote something which you can hear in my demo reel, actually, which sounded a lot like Kings of Leon, but I only realized it like a month ago, and I'd written that years ago. But Kings of Leon wasn't a band that I'd listened to a lot these days. When I wrote that piece, actually, I think I'd heard it like once or twice, that song. But I thought I'd come up with it individually by myself, and only years later I found out, like, oh wow, I must have stolen that. I really wasn't aware of that, and no one told me. Like, I showed this to a bunch of people and nobody said a word. It's really weird. Like, I would expect my friends to speak up at that point, but they didn't for some reason. Maybe they didn't realize it as well. Who knows? So yeah. At some point, it's already impossible to write really, truly original music. So just do whatever you want to do. Write the music that you want to write. Moreno says, it seems like performing an act of bringing your record alive. Oh, it seems like performing is an act of bringing your record alive. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, absolutely. You can really totally ruin a song by performing it badly. Itachi says, can you post the link to your Riff and Run PDF? Yes, I can. Give me one sec. You can download it here. There we go. Mark Farnsworth says, that's such a British name, isn't it? Like, straight out of Pride and Prejudice. Thank you so much for giving out so much free advice. Love watching your videos. Also, you look like ex-Ambassador's lead singer. Sexy. Oh, thank you very much. How about analyzing Manchester Orchestra in your artist series? Would be an interesting challenge for sure. Not gonna say no to that. Maybe in the future. I don't think this season, but maybe in the future. Thanks, man. Highly appreciate it. Ashraf says, thank you so much. Couldn't be more grateful. Moreno says, for a beginner guitarist or pianist, what would you recommend focusing on? Chords. Don't focus on, like, especially if you want to be a writer, I would say really forget about the soloing and all the quick licks and all of that kind of stuff. Really focus on chords and start inventing your own chords or your own voicings of chords. And just like, when I play around on guitar, a lot of times if I'm going for something like sort of melodic and something rather pretty rather than riffy, I'm just going to start like pressing notes. You know, and you come up with some stuff just by pressing some notes, and a lot of it is experimentation. That's how I wrote my first songs, and I still do it like that, you know? Just play around until you find something that actually sounds cool. It's really not that difficult. But focus on the right hand, focus on picking patterns, and focus on being able to play those power chords, which are kind of straining on your index fingers. So that's something to kind of work on. So power chords is definitely something if you want to go for rock, especially. Open chords, like just figure out some interesting voicings. The normal open chords, obviously. Yeah, so chords, and strumming patterns. So that means like full strums, or maybe arpeggiate, kind of like single plucking, or maybe with using your fingers, sort of a finger style kind of thing. But that's where it's at, man. If you want to write songs, that's really the best way to start, I think. Yaroslav says, correct. I was asking whether it's possible to use dominants and subdominants and tonics in modes while still keeping the feel of the mode. Yes, that can be a tricky thing. It depends a little bit on the mode. Technically, you don't really want to use too many dominants, especially if you resolve them. That becomes a challenge. But you can still use those, the dominant chord, just don't resolve it, or don't use like seventh chords, because seventh chords obviously have a lot more tension than just using a 5. So if I'm, for example, let's say I'm writing a song in D Dorian, right? So... right? Did that feel like... Okay, it felt a little bit like C major, didn't it? So I guess the answer is... So here's why I haven't actually tried this out, because it's not something I really think about too much. I don't really separate the two. I don't really think of it as, okay, now I'm writing a song that is like going to be in this mode or whatever, and now I'm writing a song that's in this mode. I think more in terms, the way I think about it is I'm stealing or I'm borrowing ideas from those modes. So if I want something that sounds dark and metal and, I don't know, just tense, I'm going to borrow something from Phrygian, which is this like half step, right? So that's something I'm going to borrow, and I'm going to put it in there, even if the song is in a completely different key. Make sense? So even if the song is in B, I might still use like the E flat to F double flat. Is that what it is? Should be. Maybe I'm wrong. I think I'm right though. No, wait, I'm messing something up. What did I say? I'm in B flat? Yes, no, that was correct. Or let's say I want something, some kind of like a Dorian sound. What I'm going to use is maybe something, this is easier to show on piano actually, but maybe... That's a really nice chord, actually. So this is kind of a Dorian sound because I'm playing a C major over a D major chord. So there's a D major in here, and there's also C major, and C major and D minor. Sorry, it should be D minor. Was that? Did I mess something up? So no, I was actually playing. What was that? A Lydian kind of sound. That's what it is, not Dorian. So that's something I would steal, like that F sharp in there, which is from Lydian. That's just something I want that sound. I don't really care what key I'm in or what mode I'm in. I might analyze it after the fact, after I've written something like, oh, this sounds really beautiful. What's going on here? Then that's something I'll maybe think about. But very rarely do I really think like, oh, I just played a 2, now I should be playing a 5, because that's what the cadence tells me. Very rarely does that sound good. Very rarely does that sound modern, is probably the crucial thing about that, because cadences all tend to sound really classical. So I tend to stay away from those really classical cadences, like 2/5, 4/5, or like, and clearly 5/1. 4/1 is fine. 4/1 is totally fine. 7/1 tricky in minor, yes. Major, not really. In general, like the 7 in major, like that diminished chord, is a little bit tricky. Something I try to stay away from. Sometimes in metal I might use it, but maybe I like resolve it differently. Yeah, so my advice is don't think too much about those things. You can really kind of overanalyze your stuff. Really listen and see if it sounds good, and if it gives you an idea. Like for me, that idea of like Phrygian, let's use that half step. That becomes a big part of the riff. But then like let's throw it against something else. I'm not really. Is that still Phrygian? I don't know, and I don't care. It doesn't matter. It sounds cool, so let's just use that. And I'm using that dark half step chord thing. That's the thing that I'm using from it. I'm only using it really for inspiration, not for guidance. I want to be the guide in my song. I want to be the guy who takes control of the writing. All right, what's going on here? M. Martin says, normally I make R&B and hip-hop music. I would like to make some rock instrumentals just to widen my horizons, but I don't know where to start. Do you have some basic rules and beginner advice? The drums are really important, and you can basically double everything that you play in guitar with the bass. So just double the bass notes of the guitar with the bass guitar. That's really super simple. So all you really have to write is one cool guitar riff and then a drum riff that works really well with that. Some really good bands to listen to would be Element 80's 2 records that they've done. I'm a big fan of them. They made a record called The Bear, and then their previous album was called the self-titled one, so just Element 80. I think you can still find it on here on YouTube. But writing something like that, I think, is really interesting, because so much of that is about the rhythm, and the way they intersect different ideas with different instruments is super, super well done. I think it's a really cool band to study. So that's something I would recommend you check out. It's easy enough to analyze, even though it's some fairly complex guitar parts. What's going on with the total band, like how everyone is interacting with each other, is fairly simple and straightforward, because they're all doing the same thing. If the guitar chugs a note, the bass is going to chuck that note, and the bass drum is going to hit that note. So that stuff is fairly easy to wrap your head around. The riffs maybe not, but just that interaction between those 3 core elements of the band is. So that's something I would recommend you check out as a beginner. Also, I have a course called the Drum Writing Master Files. I don't know if you have that one, where I talk about how the bass drum interacts with the bass guitar and how you can write a bass lick based on a bass drum or the other way around. So that's definitely worth checking out, because that is really especially important for rock music. And then a lot of it is just like, for me, is just playing around on guitar, finding like a cool riff that I enjoy, By the way, could you guys hear what I was playing on the baritone? Could you hear some notes, or was it just like, could you just hear the picking sound? I just want to know whether you actually can hear what I'm playing on the baritone. JFL says, hello, sometimes I compose awesome instrumentals, but when it comes down to vocals, I'm not satisfied with my writing and feel like I want to rewrite the vocals. What's the best way to do it? I actually have a whole course about that called the Hook Checklist, and those are actually the literal 7 steps I go through when I'm trying to rewrite a melody. Because I do that quite a lot, actually. People send me stuff that is half finished, and I go over everything and just kind of like make sure that the vocals... that the melodies are more commercial by, going through these 7 steps, essentially. It's not too complicated, really. But that's what the Hook Checklist is about, so I would just forward you to that. Thinking out loud, that's what it was, of course. Ashraf, thank you very much. Michael says, if you have a song big enough to get sued, you have the money to defend the lawsuit. Yes and no. Well, obviously the money that you make from the song, you're going to invest in other stuff, like in your tour, in design for your artwork or music videos. So that money is usually already spent. With hip-hop artists, it might be in cars and bitches and cocaine. So maybe it's a different thing. I don't know for hip-hop music, but a lot of times the money is already spent, so it still hurts. But what you're right about is, if you have a song that's big enough, you are probably going to get sued. So that's something you really can't defend yourself against. That's kind of how the industry is at this point. Smaller artists typically don't get sued because there's not a lot to get. If your song just got 500 plays on SoundCloud, that's really nothing, in the eyes, or like even 10,000 plays is not enough to really arouse the suspicion of some rights holders, So only if you have like a small or major hit on your hands, that's when typically the sues are going to come in the door. Right? All right, Moreno says, voicing of chords, ? So what was this about, Moreno? Voicing of chords. Oh, what a voicing is? So we can hear every chord, don't worry. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to grab this baritone here again. I'm going to show you. So, for example, for a D major chord, right, you have a couple of different options. Those are called voicings. It's the same chord. That's a D major. That's a D major. This is a D major. It's technically not a D major because this is in the wrong tuning. Maybe I'm just going to grab the acoustic after all. Let's go. Oh, I so hope this is in tune. I haven't played this one in just since the last live Q&A, I think. All right, so this is a D. This is a D. Then we have a D here. Horrible. Then we have a D that looks like this. Ugh. Man, the strings here are so much further apart. We have a D that looks like... What else could we play? How about... you could really kind of make up your own songs. Your own kind of chords. We have a chord that looks like... For example, this one. There's this one. Or... there's so many. What was this one again? No. For example... What was that? There was one like that somehow. Oh, I think it was this, right? So this would be... horrible. But anyways, it's been a while since I played those voicings. But it basically just means you can use the same notes in different ways. You can come up with different inversions, different places on the neck where to play them, and figure out different combinations with open strings as well, right? So maybe you have a chord that starts on D, and then you have the open string here, and then you need an F sharp somehow, so maybe here we get grab another D, right? So that's maybe a voicing you could just come up with. Not really pretty though. But you cannot come up with a voicing on your own if you know the notes in the chords. And that becomes your voicings, and your voicings can really be a big thumbprint of your writing, the kind of voicings you use. As I said this previously on another live Q&A, one of the chords that I invented, obviously I didn't invent it, but was this chord here, which I really think is very beautiful. So what is that actually? So first of all, when I'm writing it, I don't really care. I know it's an A, something with an A, because the bass note is an A. But then we have the fifth, then we have the third, then we have a 4, and then we have the fifth again. So I guess it's an A minor 11, but I don't really care about that when I write. But so yeah, playing around a lot, and those voicings, as you could hear, it definitely has a big impact on what we feel when we listen to that. Alright, let's go on. Jaroslav says, brilliant advice. Both my questions answered clearly. Love your stuff, Mr. Findeisen. Thank you very much, Jaroslav. Keenan says, we heard every chord, don't worry. Yes. Itachi says, can every instrument sound be given letters that sound like English? You mean any chord, any things that you, like any notes that you play, whether they can be given names? Yes. I don't think there's anything really that you could play on. Okay, there's a couple, maybe a couple of chords, but there's almost nothing you can play on piano or guitar or any instrument that you can't somehow name in music theory. So even if you just like play a cluster chord or something like that, that's the name for it. It's a cluster chord. If you just punch down with your hand onto the strings, hitting just about every note that you can reach, that's what's called a cluster chord. And pretty much anything that sounds pretty has a name. There's anything has a name. That's what music theory is for, to like understand and analyze what you're playing. So yes, and this is something that a lot of people misunderstand. I think a lot of people think music theory is like a guide. It tells you like this sounds better than that, or this is how you should write music. Whereas music theory is really just, it just gives everything a name that you're playing anyways, and once you get to a high enough level in music theory, once you understand it thoroughly enough, and it might take quite a while for you to get there, but once you understand music theory thoroughly enough, everything you do makes sense. There's nothing you can do that you couldn't somehow explain with music theory. Let's see. Subjectively, says Yaroslav, what unusual instruments do you consider an interesting addition to the arrangement of a song? Something that I'm thinking of, especially since I talked about orchestral music earlier, I really love it when film scores use more unusual instruments. Like thinking of the Conrad Pope's orchestration for The Lord of the Rings, I think is so amazing, because it's an orchestra, classical orchestra. But almost every single section of the orchestra has been replaced with ethnic instruments. So it's not just a string section, but it's every single instrument there, every string, every violin there is replaced with a fiddle or something, Every single one of those is ethnic, and that's why that music has a really unique sound. So sometimes it's just enough to find something that is more unique. Like, that's actually the reason why I bought this baritone here, because I could have just bought a 7-string or tuned down my normal 6-string guitar and used thicker strings on it or something. But I think the baritone sounds more interesting, because not a lot of bands use a baritone for low riffing, That's actually a big part of why I bought this guitar instead of another guitar. So it's definitely a consideration for me. A 7-string is more... you can do more with a 7-string, that's for sure, because you have an additional string. So that means you have a couple more voicings, a couple more things that you can do on it. But not a lot of people do have a baritone, so that's why I got this one. And so the more unusual instruments you can find that still do the same thing that what you want to do, I think the better. It's really going to make your sound more interesting. That being said, you still have to make those sound great. So if you have an instrument that just sounds like shit, that still does the same thing that you want to do musically, if you can get it to sound very good, then, maybe don't do it. But you get what I'm saying, right? All right. So, but as for a couple of examples, let's see. I really love, for example, the hang drum is one of my favorite instruments. There's a band called the Portico Quartet, Portico Quartet, that uses a hang drum, and I think it's such beautiful music. I really love it. It's super relaxed, chill music. Man, if you're into that kind of stuff, man, you're gonna totally dig Portico Quartet, which is kind of like a jazz combo, I guess. But the way they play music, it almost sounds like an electronic record, like a trip hop album. Super cool, but without vocals. Although on their album Portico Quartet, the self-titled one, there is a track that has vocals, and it's great. So they had like some guest vocals, a guest feature there. Yeah, hang drum, really amazing. Like, as I said, like all those ethnic kind of instruments, I'm a really big fan of. I really like instruments like baritone saxophone instead of alt saxophone, and like I just use something that typically an alt saxophone would play. I like to give to a baritone, but just because I really like the way a baritone sounds in those high registers. You can do stuff like that as well, even saying, instead of letting a guitar play this part, let's have a bass play it and have him play it really highly. Sacre du Printemps, the opening of Sacre du Printemps is played by a bassoon, and it's super high, so it's super difficult to play, but it really sounds very interesting. It doesn't sound like an oboe played it. It really sounds like a bassoon played it, just very high. So sometimes giving a part to an instrument that is out of its range, or out of its typical range that you would typically give to another instrument, can sometimes be really interesting and really freshen up a sound and make it really cool. One example of this from the pop music market would be that song that Taylor Swift did for the second installment of the 50 Shades of Grey film. What was that called? She did a feature with, who was it again? Taylor Swift, 50 Shades. What was that? I Don't Want to Live Forever, right? With Zayn. What I think is really interesting about that song, about the arrangement of that, is the chorus is sung by Zayn in falsetto, where it would have been much easier to let Taylor sing it, because it's much more her arranged than it is his. But using his voice in falsetto just sounds way more interesting than having her sing it in her standard, like, boring voice, so to say. Not saying that Taylor Swift's voice is boring, obviously, but like if she sings in that range, it's not her most interesting. It's not a really interesting sound, but like letting him sing it in falsetto is really interesting, or in head voice in this case. So that's an example from a pop song here. But so yeah, give the part to someone who can still do it, but maybe gives a whole new kind of edge to it. All right, let's see. Anderson IV says, how do bands like 21 Pilots pull off multiple types of genres in my personal tracks? Sometimes my songs demand some screaming, some guitar, some future-based synth, or light ad-libs. I'm going to have to hurry up a little bit now, unfortunately, because we're running out of time here. I think a lot of it is the production. A lot of it is the sound of the vocalist. They have a certain vocal sound that they tend to kind of come back to. And there are songs that really fall out of their spectrum, for sure. There are some tracks that really don't feel at home with them, but it's the minority of the tracks. They are a very creative band that is all over the place, for sure. But kind of they have a vocal sound that they keep returning back to, and the sort of recipe that they keep returning back to. So the songwriting behind it is kind of similar, because the rapping comes back, the drum grooves come back. There's certain things that just make the 21 Pilots sound. And obviously the vocal sound of Tyler is something that, is something that just keeps coming back. And so that kind of ties it all back together. Not as much as a Taylor Swift or a Rihanna, obviously, but it kind of holds it together loosely. And I think in this particular case, fans actually appreciate that they're so all over the place, that they're so creative and daring to do different things, that actually works in their favor. But I don't think it would work really well in pop music. Like if they released every single track from their album, like in how different they are, I think a lot of people would lose touch with them and feel like, oh, they're kind of like doing everything now. They're kind of lost their style. And so they very strategically just released those songs from their albums that kind of sound the same. But if you listen to their albums, they're really kind of all over the place. So in the what I'm saying is, in the public eye, they kind of have one sound, even though if you listen to their albums, and that's not always the case. Hey, how you been, man? Says Shuck. I've been good. How are you? What are some caveats when is that how you pronounce it? Caveats when mixing? And what's that mean again? Actually, I have to check that out. It's like some things that can come up, right? Caveats. Caveats. Some caveats. There we go. Like caviar. Caveats. All right. I've heard that word before, actually, in movies. I just didn't know that's how you spell it. So what are some things I'm warning of when mixing? Not listening to your mix. Following the formulas too much is obvious. Don't try yourself on compressors and EQing before you understand how volume and panning works. Those two are some incredibly powerful tools that if you understand how to use those correctly, you can almost save the compression and EQing completely, almost completely, with the exception of maybe the vocals. For those, you kind of need EQing and compression. But understand loudness and panning and what that does to your mix, and how you can place an instrument with just those two tools. Art of the Mind says, I seem to be able to write choruses but not verse hooks so well. Any tips? Yeah, the verses are typically where the storytelling comes in. So maybe what you could try, and I'm sorry I have to cut you short here a little bit because we're running out of time. What you could try is think about, so once you have your chorus, think about what that could mean in a lyric, in a story, right? What's that talking about? So if you have a line like, tonight we're the kings of our city tonight, or something, think about like, what does that mean? So what's the story going to be about here? Is it about some folks who run around town from bar hopping or something like that, or is it a sexual kind of story? I don't know. And tonight is the night I lose my virginity or whatever. Like, what's your story behind it? And then come up with some lines for the verses where you tell that story. And typically when you approach a verse more in a storytelling kind of fashion, then you have a lot more lines typically, and then just try to sing those lines. And once you have a line, a melody that goes with that, try to fit the other lines, the other text lines to that melody line. That was a very complicated sentence. Hopefully that's clear. If not, just let me know, and maybe we can explain it. I can explain it next Q&A. Unfortunately, a little bit late with this very broad question. This is a big question that I think needs more time. So if you want to come back next week, that'd be great. Actually, next week I'm not here. I'm on vacation next week. That's something I actually have to talk about in just a couple of seconds, because I'll be in the States, folks. I'm going on a hiking trip with my girlfriend Joanna, and man, I'm super excited about it, because I've been working like crazy lately, and it's so hot here, and just sitting in front of my computer in this heat is mad. So I'm so looking forward to changing that and getting out of the house and into the sun again, but hiking sun. So that's a good thing, actually. And we're going to go, so we're starting in Las Vegas, going to Grand Canyon, and then doing a tour back through Las Vegas and the other national parks to San Francisco, which is where we're going back from. So I'm super excited about that. This is going to be awesome. I've been looking forward to this trip for a really long time. I've done it before, going from San Francisco to Las Vegas. So I've seen the national parks already, but I want to show Joanna what I consider the most beautiful trip, most beautiful vacation I've ever taken in my entire life. I really think the national parks are absolutely astounding, like breathtaking. So I really want her to see it. Anyways, sorry, some more questions here. Let's go through those really quickly. If you want a full answer to those, please come back next week. Not next week, but let's see. Actually, when is the next one going to be? The next one is going to be the 6th, I believe. Yes, so the 6th one, the 6th of August, that's going to be when I'm going to be back, because Germans take longer vacations. I know a lot of Americans like to take like 1 or 2 days off. Germans like to take 2 or 3 weeks off every, like in a year. So it's something very typical in Germany, but I hear in America it's very strange to do that kind of thing. So I thought I'd clarify that real quick. Sonic Charm Lab says, sometimes the transition from the chorus melody to the verse melody sounds smooth, while the transition from that same verse to the chorus sounds not quite as smooth. What could be a reason? You could use a couple of tension techniques. This is something I explained in the addiction formula. Even something like ending on a note that like really has a lot of tension, like, I don't know, a 7 in the key, or maybe a 6 in the key that resolves back to the 5, or a 2 in the key that resolves back to the 1. Those are all ideas that you could use to increase the tension in your pre-chorus or in the end of your verse to resolve that in the chorus. Again, for more, read the addiction formula, because that has pretty much all the techniques in one book. Moreno says, lols, why the baritone vocal range sort of taboo in the music world? Portico Quartet? Yes, Portico Quartet. That's how you spell it. Exactly, Moreno. The baritone vocal range is sort of taboo in the music world. Is it? Could be. I don't know. Fulendra Prasad Sharma. Sorry, man. This sucks that you asked your question so late, because now I can't really spend a lot of time answering it. I'm very sorry. How can I get to start writing songs? Yeah, that's a really big question, man. This is something you really have to ask me earlier in the chat. I'm sorry, man. Could you come back next week? On the 6th of August? That would be really great. Sorry, man, to keep you waiting. But you can also just check out a lot of stuff on my website. I'm sure you're going to find some things that are going to be helpful. Also, I have a video on YouTube called what's it called? The Commandments of Songwriting, or something like that. Holistic. Let's see. It's called the 10 Commandments of Songwriting. So this is shut up. This is for beginners. So you can check that one out. I just posted it here in the live chat, Felendra. All right. Marina says, Friedemann, can I come with you guys? Would be awesome, man. Yeah, man, as much as I would love to see as many of you guys as possible, because I know a lot of you are in America, as much as I would love that, I kind of need a little bit of time off. So, yeah, it's kind of a shame. I would really love to spend a lot of time with you guys and just like meet up with a lot of you and have a lot of meet and greets, but I kind of need 2 weeks off because it's been so crazy here lately. So I'm just really looking forward to just some hiking and some time in the sun. Martin says, much fun auf der anderen Seite vom Teich. Seems to be a great trip. Have a nice time. Thanks, man. Yoslav says, enjoy your vacation. Fulendra says, yeah, sure. And there we go. Guys, thank you so much for listening. This was a lot of talking, and I'm already hoarse. I'm a little hoarse. I think it's still the funniest thing you could say in English, because it sounds like you're a little animal. Doesn't it? Does anyone laugh about that when they're a child in the States? This must be the funniest thing to whenever a 6-year-old finds out that you can say, I'm a little horse, not actually meaning that you're an animal. How is that not the funniest thing? Seriously. All right. Guys, I don't know. I keep bringing up weird things like that. Guys, take care. Love you guys. And I'll see you guys on August 6th. I've left some YouTube videos for you. I've pre-made a couple of videos for the main YouTube channel, so you won't miss me completely during that time. But until then, I'll see you in, what is that, 3 weeks? Is that right? 6th of August? Should be in 3 weeks. Until then, take care. And of course, as always, stay